Next one that we have here comes from, if I can scroll to the left, day 5/4. Hello, I've been working with an italki teacher on and off for 2 years since I started outputting. One thing that he's always had me do was to translate sentences, first in English and then help me construct how to correctly and realistically say it in Spanish, focusing on Mexicanisms and slang. We would compare what's different from English and many nuances to make it sound like real spoken Spanish. He would also assign me to translate about 10 sentences between sessions, which we would check in the next lesson. I've been doing this with ChatGPT and have it give me a couple sentences per day and also to check my own translations. I'm at the point in my output where I need a good deliberate practice for my accuracy. I write in a brief journal. I have ChatGPT check it, but I find it limited and that it's in first person. The journal tends to use the same tenses over and over again since I'm just talking to myself. So overall, what does the Refold team think about this? And is there other ways you would do deliberate practice for output like this?
Okay.
It sounds like there's 2 questions in here.
2 questions here, yep.
Yeah.
So,
Translation and then deliberate output practice.
yeah, so translation is one of those things where some people advise against it. Some people are all for it. The theory behind advising against it is you don't want to be translating, right? You want to be able to interact and understand the language directly. So you don't want to be translating from that into your native language or vice versa, because it's too slow. That being said, translating is a whole skill of how do you accurately and appropriately convert the idea from one language into another, not just the words, but the whole idea. And it sounds like that's what your tutor is having you do, not just translating like on a word-for-word basis, but is trying to help you think about what is the core root idea of this thing and how do you express that in the target language or vice versa.
I think of that as how would you say this thing in that language?
Right.
Versus
not what does this mean?
Yeah.
And that's something that I've struggled with too, where like someone will ask, oh, like, what does this mean? And I won't give them a word for word translation. I'll give them like, this is how somebody would say it in English. And that actually ends up annoying people sometimes because they're like, no, it actually means this. And I'm like, well, yes, but on a word for word basis, but we wouldn't say that in English.
The example that I was thinking about the other day was like how you say, what the first thing you would say to somebody at 9 a.m. and if you see him in the corridor or hallway, right? You could say, good morning, but like in Spanish, you'd say buenos dias, and in Czech, you might say dobre rano. And those all have different translations of like good morning versus good day versus good morning. And then in the afternoon, it changes to become, well, you wouldn't, as in English, you don't say good day anymore. You say good afternoon. But then in Czech, you would say good day for good afternoon. But then for Spanish, you'd say good afternoon. It's like,
Yeah.
it's
like contextually appropriate phrasing.
exactly.
Yeah. So I think practicing contextually appropriate phrasing and practicing converting ideas between languages, I think is a very valuable thing to do. It's a whole skill set, especially if you're trying to translate, and translating in real time is a very difficult challenge. So if that's like a skill that you want, it's absolutely worth doing. That being said, it is a different skill set than, say, how do I process the language? How do I think in the language and have the same ideas that a native speaker would have?
Right.
And it may influence that. It may help you learn how to think in what the core ideas are in the native language. If you have a teacher who's actually showing you those core ideas. Can't really speak to that though, just from my personal experience, but you may find that it does actually help you with that. For me, the thing that helps is just sitting in the language and not going back to English for extended periods of time. And then I can essentially convert my brain over to Spanish, but it doesn't mean that I can translate between the two.
Right. Yeah, I also don't really use much translation at all. I do a little bit of like, I actually do probably more direct word for word, almost a gloss to help me kind of process at the beginning. But I really don't do much actual like translation like that, especially focused on natural phrasing, just because I'd rather figure out it in the language. And maybe I start with a more unnatural sentence, but then we talk about it and we find that this is actually a better way to say that same idea. But that was all done in the target language. So that's just my preferred method, but I don't necessarily see that as being strictly superior to then converting between the two, as long as it's not like 90% English in the class and 10% Spanish, because that would be just kind of a waste of time when you could be doing more Spanish.
Yeah. Second question. So that was around having a deliberate practice for output.
For
and specifically
output
output
accuracy.
accuracy. Yeah. There's a million different things that you can do, right? Writing in journal, as you said, is mostly first person past tense. And if you want to have more variation, you can do things like summaries of books, in which you can do like first, second, third person for past tense, or you can adjust them and be like a present tense. Oftentimes when you listen to like summaries of things, it's all done in the present tense, or it can be done in the past tense. So there's some variability there and some optionality. You can also write essays, and that it's a little hard to get up and running. Like if you're not in school used to writing essays, it can be hard to like start writing them on your own. One thing that I've been playing with a bit that I kind of like is I've taken the Spanish 1K deck and I've inverted it to be a production deck, and I went through and I removed everything that I thought was too easy and just kept the things that I thought were hard. And I just take like one word at a time and like create a paragraph up using that word about some topic, and then I try to link them all together. So it creates like one cohesive structure with 5 random words, and I find that's
you use Anki as like a improv scene generator.
Basically, yeah.
And then you just make a little story or paragraphs that connect together with specific ideas or words just to get you started, rather than having to like completely come up with it yourself.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like when you give yourself some constraints, it actually helps you, because you don't have to think about the whole problem space. So if you said like I'm going to choose a topic and I'm going to choose a random list of words and I need to use all these words in this topic, like that's a way to sort of spark some creativity.
I do a little bit of sort of creative writing. I'm writing a short story about my cat, and that's been fun. But then I go back and correct it with a tutor, which takes a lot longer. So I've sort of stagnated because I'm way ahead on my writing, and I want to go back and check more of it first. But then I've also played some solo RPGs, which are basically other just random prompt generators, where they're like, I did one where it's like you're on sort of an alien planet and you see a XYZ, like you had to add a bunch of features to it, and you just write about that for a couple of paragraphs. Then you go to the next thing on the planet and you just kind of vibe off of that.
Do you have a specific, because you've mentioned this before, do you have like a specific game that you play?
So if you Google solo RPGs, there's a site called titch.io or itch.io. I can't read. And there's a bunch of them, and you can actually filter by, there's a bunch of free ones. And I think that one is Alone Among the Stars, but there are a whole bunch of little ones, and they're all essentially the same idea, where you generate a random prompt, you have a couple of rules, and then you write. They're basically writing prompt generators rather than like actual games.
Okay.
But if you sort of approach it as the idea that you are trying to become this little character, it can be really fun.
Are these intelligent systems? Like, are these tied into any of the generative AI things?
There are some that people have built on, like as I think they're called GPTs, like a custom GPT, which you can do that with, or they also give you like an image and that sort of thing, which is kind of cool. But I've always played just the very basic, which I've used actual like a deck of cards as the generator, and they're very labors of love by enthusiasts. So I think it's a little more human and cool that way. But you can definitely find some generative AI ones that could even probably correct you. I'm sure if somebody wanted to, they could build one that is for like outputting that also builds in corrections or something. Would be kind of neat. But
yeah, because I tried to do that with ChatGPT about a year ago, of like collaboratively create a story, and it couldn't keep track of the plot. Right.
Oh yeah, the context window is pretty low.
I'm not sure if it was context window or if it was that it just doesn't understand contradiction in plot. Um,
Probably also that, yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe one of the newer versions has more capability to do that, but it would just say things that were not compatible with previous
Yep.
things that we had already defined in the world.
Yeah. I think it'd be a better system if you have to do all of the generation, but it gives you like prompts that will always fit, right? Because that's how these simple systems work, where it's like you pull the next one. That was also fun, is like you're pretending to be a little hedgehog that runs like a Western style inn, and then each prompt is about like who comes into your bar, right? And what character, and then you have to make up something about that character, what's going on, what they need, and that kind of thing. But the actual like game is simple enough that it never is going to contradict itself, because it doesn't. What would it do? All right.
Yeah. Right.
So.
The one other thing that I've done is a bunch of the language learning apps and tools out there now have sort of conversational AI. So you like speak to it. So Jump Speak is the one that is most common nowadays when you see all the ads for it, but it's got pretty bad reviews, so I haven't even bothered trying it. But there's one called, I think, LinguaTalk, and it's got a whole like tutoring platform built in, but then they also have a generative AI interface. And I found that one was interesting. They had prompts like, debate prompts. So like, what are some controversial things? And you have a conversation, and you can either type your answers or you can just speak, and they've got some niceties around transcribing your audio. And then they'll like automatically send it, and you can put like a timing on it. So like when you pause for 3 seconds, it automatically sends. So it ends up sort of being like an actual conversation.
The new ChatGPT also can do that relatively well and more naturally, but it's not like set up to be a tutor.
This one like looks at what you're saying, transcribes it, and then corrects it in real time.
Yeah.
As you're having the conversation. So
cool. I think we're getting a little bit off of the main question of like output ways, but so basically the idea of like trying to improve your accuracy and your outputting is you want to do output and then find your mistakes and try to fix them next time, right? That sort of iterative approach where you do something, so either writing or speaking, and then in some way go back and look at it or correct it. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So like we said, by using something that will correct it for you, either a live tutoring session, an AI, yourself going back and looking at it. That is not yourself. That one doesn't count, since the idea of this one is if somebody else is looking at it for you. Or you go back and look at it and try to find your mistakes and what you could change. Or you do the same thing several times and try to improve over time as you reflect on it. But that is essentially the feedback loop. You're trying to do some output and then improve on that so that next time it's better.
And there's a million different configurations for doing that, and there's a bunch of different tasks that you can do for the prompting. So it's kind of up to you to figure out what you're actually interested in. And it's helpful to have a partner, honestly. Like, it's nice to have the ChatGPTs and whatnot, but I lose interest in them pretty quickly.
Yeah,
when I'm the only one driving the conversation.
It's just empty. I much prefer actual classes, and trying to find things there and talk through something. I especially like actually when the native speaker doesn't really know why something is, so we can like dive into it, be like, okay, so if I say it like this, it feels more like that. This one's not correct. This one is technically correct, but it's not what I want to say. This is what I want to say. Like, we go through that, and I feel like I learn a lot more that way. However, that is not as effective for like just obvious mistakes, right? If you just don't use the plural form or something like that, where it's like, yeah, you didn't say that right. That doesn't necessarily have to be with a tutor. You can also get that through just writing and going back and seeing, oh yeah, that's wrong. And in that case, journaling or writing a story or whatever, and then correcting it with a always online AI is probably more effective, more efficient rather.